And I think there's probably some real challenge for people to be able to reach to the person who's on the other side of that wall and say, "You okay in there? What's going on?"
A wall is like, nope, never happening again. Whereas a boundary is more along the lines of, this is what I need in order for myself to be safe. I control it versus the wall controlling me.
We're going to just go into that whole catastrophization. Did I just make up a word?
Welcome back to Unapologetic Rabble-Rousers. I'm Doc Shelley.
And I'm Carla Lewis. So we're going to take on some fascinating topics stemming from the last episode that we did, which was this thing about being able to know when it's time to walk away. Now let's have
know when to run.
Yeah, know when to fold them and all of that. Okay, but how about, what would we call this one, Shelley?
We will call this, let's make it simple, boundaries or brick walls.
Okay, all right. And we have certainly talked a lot about boundaries, but I think this puts it in another light, because the notion, when you juxtapose that with the notion of a brick wall, we think of the boundaries as being permeable, brick walls not so much.
Right.
But when we're looking into, well, why would we even be thinking about putting up a wall and having it be impermeable? What's really going on there? So this should be fun to just kind of chew on what's really going on when we're in a position. Now, consider this. Our last episode was, we were talking about, you just need to understand when it's time to say thank you. And now it's time to move on.
Move along. Walk away.
We're just moving on. We're settling into some new sense of peace, but it's probably a little jumbled at that beginning when you just had to say, this is done, either by choice or it just is. It's done. Okay, so we have boundaries and we have brick walls.
Yes.
So there's emotion behind it. There's distinct thought process about this is what I'm going to do, but most of that is probably grounded in the emotion of having to say the end to something.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times when I think about the walls that I've built over the years, a lot of it is protection, right? I'm never going to let them get me.
I think probably that would be the first thing that would come up for anybody.
Yeah.
The first thing you want to do is be safe. How often have we talked about that our wiring, the chemical bath that comes over us, which we can't control, is all about that understanding that something is no longer safe. And so that kind of influences the rationality of thoughts.
Sure.
Getting up and going cave woman.
Cave woman. You're funny.
One thing I don't think any of the listeners would ever doubt is that we have fun.
That is true.
Mm-hmm.
That is true. So when you think about boundaries and brick walls, how do you differentiate them?
Brick walls, by the nature of a material that is solid and it doesn't let air through, it doesn't let water through. Well, I had a house where bricks did let water through, but that's a different story. But these are, as we mentioned earlier, impermeable, where boundaries, they are as solid or not as I manage them to be. I make a decision about when a boundary is hard and fast, or might be, I was going to say scalable, but that it can morph. And we've also talked a lot about how that screws people up too, because if you have some boundary or you didn't have a boundary and all of a sudden you do, that can really confuse people. But I think I see boundaries as negotiable inside me. They're something that I'm putting up so that I'm feeling safe and comfortable in the decisions I'm making. I'm not hiding. I think maybe a brick wall represents something about hiding.
Yeah.
That there's a safety protection mechanism. How about you?
Yeah, for sure. I think when I think about a brick wall, it's like that layer of protection. I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna let somebody get me.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of leaves people kind of like when I have boundaries, they're clear, they're articulated, they're communicated, you know where I stand. And if I just have a wall up, people are like, what? What's that about? What's wrong with you? Like, they're not grounded in clarity. They're not communicated. Like, people don't know why you have walls up. And I think they're often just unspoken. So it leaves people wondering what is going on versus having that clarity of you have boundaries and I can choose to honor those or not honor those. When you have walls up, it's like sometimes people can chip away at the wall and sometimes they can't.
And sometimes I think people just run right into them, not recognizing that they are there. And I think it's the people on the outside of the wall that really run into, that have the opportunity to run into it. If you're inside the wall, if that wall has been built around you, it's like trying to read the label on a jar from the inside. You can't. You don't know. You don't know. But anybody who's coming up against that wall is going to become abruptly aware. And then that puts them in an interesting position to say, okay, I'm feeling this wall. It hasn't been there, and now it is. And I think there's probably some real challenge for people to be able to reach to the person who's on the other side of that wall
Oh, for sure.
and say, "You okay in there? What's going on?" So it's like when we encounter something like that, then my initial reaction would be, "Oh my gosh, there's something not right about this." Now you're going to go into dear friend, mama bear mode, whatever it might be, saying we've got to, I've got to do something. What that might be, I don't know.
Yeah.
But trying to reach into somebody who may be oblivious to the fact the wall is even there.
Yeah, I think back to my younger self. There was a lot of walls and I wouldn't have thought about them being walls. To me, those were probably boundaries. That was self-protection. It was just it was strength. It was I don't need anybody. I'm good.
Oh yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
don't know. I don't know that I would have recognized them as walls.
Yeah. We put there's structures of some sort that we were putting up that protected emotion, protected the thought processes. It kept me from having to face things that I didn't want to face. So if I put a wall between me and that,
I never have to deal with that again.
that's right.
Whereas a
Now,
boundary is more like, ah, this is such a, I just had like like
okay.
a wall is like, nope, never happening again. Whereas a boundary is more along the lines of, this is what I need in order for myself to be safe. I control it versus the wall controlling me.
That's interesting because whether or not you've consciously put that division, that or that divider between you and a person and or a situation, if the boundary, it's the possibility it's a gateway. It's not a stopper.
It's like the wall is like, no one ever, ever, ever is getting in here. The
Mm-hmm.
boundary says, if you meet these qualifications, I can be safe with you
Okay.
versus never will I ever do X again. I mean, my first heartbreak, right? You know, I'm never dating ever again. And I didn't for a really long time. And then it was like, wait a minute, this is stupid. So, so,
Holding yourself
you know,
hostage to an event from way long ago.
yeah, and it's some level of protection. And then when I would ask for help from people, I was often disappointed because they wouldn't show up or they wouldn't show up how I needed them to. So I will never ask for help. It is still hard for me to ask for help, but it's more of a boundary now than it is a wall. And it used to be a big wall, a really
Mm,
thick wall, because I was like, I'm not going to let you hurt me. I'm not even going to give you the opportunity to
mhm,
try to let me down. I'm just not going to give you the chance. Over here, it's like, okay, let's have some realistic expectations.
mm.
Let that person know what the expectation is, and I have a boundary around it. It's just a very different perspective on this is what I need to communicate in order to feel safe by asking for help versus screw that, I'm never asking for help.
Because obviously nobody will. They can't ever do what it is I need them to do. We're going to just go
Yeah.
into that whole
Yeah.
catastrophization. Did I just make up a word? But the just the broad brush paint badness, nobody is ever going to be able to help me the way I need them to help me. So I'm never going to ask for help again.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I'm not going to stand up for being disappointed anymore. So if I don't ask, what's the saying? Blessed are those who expect little, for they shall not be disappointed,
Right.
which is a sad, sad, sad statement. But you also bring up a point that now I've got this image, if you're hovering over the landscape of your life and you're seeing a lot of pathways, gentle paths going through, and then these brick walls, these brick fortresses that are around different parts of one's life, one's being, the things that matter or are fearful. That's like an obstacle course.
Hmm.
And being aware that we've actually set that up for ourselves would be a really important thing, I would think.
Hmm. And imagine how, like, the people close to you, as you're navigating your own brick walls, imagine the impact to the people around you. You're withholding things from them. You're probably cutting them out of conversations. You're acting like you don't care when you really do. You're probably not, like I already said, not communicating with them. You're withholding needs. You're probably not showing any sort of affection. Like the list just goes on and on when you're hiding behind that wall that people don't get to see you because you're shadowing yourself behind
Right.
that wall.
And so if somebody looking at you from outside of all that sees these voids, they're these big blank spots.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's these pieces of us that we're keeping entombed in behind these brick walls. And that takes energy.
It does. And I think too, there's a level of isolation, but also you feel safe in the silence. So it's a safe space, but it's also a little bit of a dangerous space.
Yeah, because I have this sense more about if you're in that, what you've just coined as silence. You're in this echo chamber. You're in this room. What the only thing that's in there with you is your thoughts. And if you are holding those in, they can't do much more than fester. There's no fresh air. There's no airing of what's going on. When I have a bad thing that might be floating around in my head, the last thing I need is isolation so that it can become bigger just in that cave. I'm not sure that that even made sense.
It did make sense. But I also think that if you are a person that has lived with the walls and they just keep building up, building up, building up, building up, that's your safe zone. And you don't even know what it could be outside of that wall.
Mhm.
Whereas you have boundaries, more boundaries than walls. So you know what it's like on the other side of that wall and you strive to be on the other side of that wall. But
Mhm.
if I've never climbed that wall or I've never even peeked over the edge to be like, what is it like outside of this chamber I've put around myself, this wall I've built around myself? I am perfectly fine where I'm at.
Yeah, if I don't know any better.
I still have friends. I'm still social. I have a job. I'm a functioning human being. I contribute to society, but it's all at a distance. And that's a very safe and comfortable place to be for a lot of people.
which makes it not wrong. What would, I don't know that there's an answer to this either. So, in being able to do self reflection on where might one be building a wall or where might one already have established one, just to become first aware. Like any recovery program starts with awareness. And if what I'm doing is I'm presenting a facade, something that shows voids in the person that I am to the people around me, what is it I could be doing to test where I might have that stuff to deal with?
I think that's a great question. And I think if I think about breaking that into two components, how do we even build the walls
Mm,
in the first place? Often it's a trauma response. That I think that's probably the most common
yes.
response, right? So we're gonna freeze. We're not gonna let that happen again. We covered that. And then I think too, when we experience repeated boundary violations, we start to build up a brick wall because obviously that boundary isn't working. So we start to build up that brick wall, telling ourselves we don't need other people. I don't trust anyone. I've been screwed over so many times. I trust no one.
Mm,
And then if we think about the way we might be building those brick walls, we cut people off in conversations because we want to be seen a certain way. We tell people we don't care, even though we do.
mm.
We withhold affection and communication as a way of protecting ourselves. If our boundaries feel more like an ultimatum, it's not a healthy boundary. To me, that's a big sign that you're putting a wall up because boundaries are about self care,
Mhm.
not ultimatums. It's not about other people, it's about you. And if you're using a boundary as an ultimatum, that's a wall going up. And I can't help but think about vulnerability in here too, because in order
Oh,
to
yes.
have boundaries instead of walls, that takes some level of vulnerability and some self respect. And yet, I feel like people who are really good at building up walls label vulnerability as self respect. Like they put it under the label of self respect and they think the wall is self respect. Does
Oh,
that make any
okay.
sense?
I was not tracking. Thank you for that, for coming back to that, so that they're looking at that as self-respect, self-care,
Yeah. Yeah.
not as something that's just preventing me from being open and vulnerable to something. And I can also imagine that's a fine line because being vulnerable means I know enough about what matters to me in this circumstance and what I'm willing to negotiate or yield and what I'm
Mm-hmm.
not. And
Yeah.
when I'm not clear on that, then the negotiation piece starts looking more like a threat, like danger, Will Robinson. And at that point, if I'm not in a position to really negotiate from a place of vulnerability and understanding, then the first thing I'm going to do is find a shield. The
Mm-hmm.
first thing I'm going to do is find something to hide behind. And if that means I
Absolutely.
have to build my own damn wall, then I will,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
it's preservation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the walls are definitely all about self-preservation.
Yeah.
So we think about shifting from the wall to a boundary. You mentioned self-reflection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think self-reflection is huge in really looking at what is your motive? Is it a wall or is it a boundary? So you can ask yourself, is this something that I'm doing from fear? That'd probably be a wall. Or is it something I'm doing for clarity? That would probably be a boundary.
I think it would be interesting if there's a question that precedes that to help someone determine whether or not there's even something to be looking at. That there's a given situation or circumstance where, oh, even that question should be entertained. what would prompt someone to say, oh, wait a minute, before we go any further, self to self, let's take ourselves off for a timeout.
Self.
Right, self, what's going on? Is this us needing to be a little more vulnerable because we're really just negotiating on a boundary consideration here, or am I feeling really unsafe? And why?
Yeah. And I think even just taking it up a level from that, is there something that I'm calling a boundary when it's actually a wall?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is there an area where I could, I don't, I've been using this word a lot in my other podcasts and it kind of annoys me because I don't really like it, but is but it's the only word I can think of. Is there a spot where I could soften a little bit without abandoning myself?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that kind of ties that vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to soften up. You can't have this all tough guy exterior. Where can you soften up a little bit without abandoning yourself? And so I would look at those two things and looking at, do I have walls or boundaries? And like sometimes you need the walls. Sometimes they literally are keeping you safe. And so I would look at, is that still serving me? Is it might be a wall I put up 25 years ago. I
Yes.
might not need that wall anymore. It's just become a habit. So let's take a look. Is that still serving you? And if it is, cool. If it's not, then do you need to still keep it? Do you need that wall to survive like you maybe did 25 years ago?
So back
Maybe,
to
maybe not.
self-reflection.
Self-reflection. And that might be a really good one to journal on because I always say my pen is my best coach. My
Yes.
coach might punch me in the face if she heard me say that, but follow the pen as you write.
Yeah.
It's just it can take you to places you didn't expect. And this might be something really cool to journal on as you think about walls versus boundaries in your life.
Boundaries are brick walls. An
I
incredible conversation.
Yeah, and I when we were kind of pre talking about this, I had said boundaries are bridges with clear entry points, and brick walls leave people guessing and often keep you trapped inside too. And I just want to reiterate that because I thought that was such a great
Mm-hmm.
way to wrap up a conversation on boundaries. So boundaries are your bridges. Brick walls are just going to leave people guessing and they're going to leave you trapped inside. So where you can, get those brick walls, lower them down a little bit where you feel safe to do so.
I'm Carla Lewis.
I'm Doc Shelley. We'll see you next time. Is it a wall or is it a boundary? So you can ask yourself, is this something that I'm doing from fear? That'd probably be a wall. Or is it something I'm doing for clarity? That would probably be a boundary.